there?
Enterprises are already starting down that path today, plain and simple. If they're not doing something actively as a project today, they're at least evaluating it. And you could probably pull the CIO advisory group and probably get that validated. But you know, to what Mark was saying, yeah, security is the #1 issue that's holding people back from public clouds today. It's also holding people back from private clouds as well, because there's, especially in larger enterprises, there's this concern of, well, I don't want my data touching Erik's departmental data, and how do I separate that? So you get these little fiefdoms within an organization. So you do have that challenge to fight with, but it'll happen. The second piece that needs to be addressed, and again, it's another opportunity, is right after security, the #2 issue in using public clouds, and even with private clouds, is vendor lock-in. So who else in that space is providing a similar service? So if I'm an enterprise using your company's service and I'm not happy with the service, what are my alternatives? I can go back to a traditional model, which is going to be entirely painful, or I can go to another similar vendor's product, and there just isn't that ecosystem that has developed yet in the marketplace, but it is growing pretty quickly.
But they have all your data.
Data movement is a challenge today, but I will also tell you there are companies that are thinking about that very problem as a way to abstract the compute and the applications away from the data. So you can move applications around and not have to move the data sets around, or being able to chunk up the data so that it's virtualized in its own right, separate from the computer applications. It gets a little more challenging, because typically you want your data and application to be as close together as possible, but I think it also causes another effect to happen, which is we need to take a step back, and I think this is true for anyone in the room. We need to start taking a step back and stop thinking in the traditional ways of computing architectures. And think about, if we were to do it all over again, how would we do it? If we wanted to completely virtualize and have ubiquitous access to data and applications and services, how would we do that? And I think that causes you to think a little differently, not to steal a phrase from Apple, because they've gotten a lot of press in the last day or two. But I think it causes you to think a little differently about how you would manage data and how you would chunk up data or shard data, and then kind of getting to your question.
Hello, my name is Edgar Macias from Systems and Web from Mexico. I would like to ask you about functionality, which is the main issue I have seen in Mexico. I would talk about easy-to-use applications, which is Facebook or something like that, and complex applications, which can be SAP or Oracle. And the question here is, what's the point if I can buy something in the internet at a low cost that I can't use? I mean, like SAP or Oracle, you need training. I have an industrial engineering bachelor, and it's very difficult for me to use SAP, and I go around the office and see all the people and they are using Facebook. So without training, and I have to train my own people in that kind of stuff. So the question here is, are SAP or Oracle doing some efforts to have applications as easy to use as Facebook, so the pricing could be better or different? I mean, I think it's a simple question, but it's very kind of difficult to find for me. Why are these applications different?
You know, you hit the nail on the head, because I think, you know, when you talk to some of our CIOs, they'll tell you the first time that there's a maintenance renewal bill that comes from Oracle, they will look at other options. I mean, I'm not kidding you, it's the single biggest issue that they're facing. Forget the usage. I mean, it's just the fact that, you know, the product is complex and they bought it for whatever reasons, but they're looking for alternatives, which is where the problem is. And so I think the reality is there's a tremendous opportunity around GUIs and prettier GUIs and better functionality, but there's also just the fact that from a usage perspective, it's just so difficult. I mean, you're finding companies in data warehousing, whether it's Greenplow, Master Data, that are beginning to cut some pretty good niches into different markets right now. So I think, you know, maintenance is an issue. People don't want to do renewals with Oracle and SAP. They're not showing the flex. They just can't kind of create the Facebook version of, or Enterprise 2.0 version of their software. It's just very difficult. They'll create a little bit of an abstraction layer, but it's very hard to build those hooks into the deep core of their products. It's just really difficult. So I think that's where the opportunity is. That's why Salesforce is doing what it's doing. That's why you got companies like right now, a number of SaaS companies that are out there that are creating these little products around what have been traditional SAP and Oracle strongholds.
I mean, to that point, I mean, you also have to look at the problem that each of the applications or services are solving. I mean, Oracle and SAP are pretty complex applications, relatively speaking, to a Facebook in terms of what it does for the user of that application. So you have to kind of compare that. The other thing that I do think companies eventually have to try and evolve to, and Mark was touching on this to some degree, is that, so case in point, how many of you have read the user's manual for Google? Well, the point is, there isn't one. And why isn't there one? Because inherently it's easy to use, right? But behind the scenes, there's some pretty complex algorithms that are working on your behalf. I think that same model is going to need to permeate throughout all applications in one way or another. How can you get the application as simple as Google in terms of being able to use it without a manual? SAP and Oracle are pretty complex. To get from where they are today to a Google-based model, that's a pretty big leap to make. It'll come, but it'll take a lot of time.
Just one point. I think you don't have to really develop hot new technology to be a hot startup. I mean, you can have something interesting. If you can make existing technology easier to use for normal people, then you can build a business on that. Steve Jobs has been doing it for years. So, you know, that is an important issue, and often you get situations where the company is driven by technologists that don't understand how the end user is going to actually use it, and you need someone like Steve Jobs to look at it from the other perspective and actually build an interface and build this from the other perspective around the user. And so there's real opportunities in just making things easy, all sorts of everyday things easy.